our third and final panel for the Huang Symposium titled AI and the Economy. So basically what this panel is about is like, with all these things about AI and its capabilities, how is that really going to affect kind of like the future workforce environment and like the economy as a whole? So my name is Eugene. I'm a class of 2021 Huang Fellow, and if everybody could just go down the line and kind of introduce themselves and like what their background / expertise has to do with kind of the topic of today's panel, that'd be great.
Sure. Hi everyone, is this okay? I don't know if the mic is picking this up. Yeah. So my name is Vincent Conitzer. I'm a professor of computer science here primarily. I also have appointments in economics and philosophy, and I work in AI. Fairly generally, but also especially things that have something to do with economic theory, like game theory, and so on. And more recently, with Walter, who is sitting there in the back, and some others, we've been thinking about what we call moral artificial intelligence. So thinking about how to design the objectives that AI systems should pursue.
Thanks, Vince. I don't know if you guys can hear me through the microphone, but I'm pretty loud. So are you guys in the back okay? Okay, so I'm really excited to be part of this because the Wang Fellows program is a little bit like my own journey in a sense. I went to Stanford around 2000 when the most popular major on campus was computer science, which doesn't happen often. And everyone was very excited about starting a company. I started as an engineering major and decided that I was really interested in the social implications. Ended up building myself a design your own major that sounds like something that's available here, but wasn't really available there, called Science, Technology, and Society. Graduated in a recession, couldn't get a job in something related to that, so I went to work at the local startup called Google, and I worked on AI there kind of for detecting fraud. So I implemented my first support vector machine, which at the time was like the new hotness in AI, and is now like the old like old rickety hotness. I was there for a couple years and then did a PhD in economics. I was the senior economist for competition and technology policy under Barack Obama. So I took some of these technology questions to the White House. And the big things we were interested in were jobs, displacement, and what's this going to mean for everybody. So I'm excited that you guys are working on this stuff. I think it's really important. And that's it.
Hi everybody, I'm David Hoffman. I'm a 1993 grad of the law school here and have spent most of my career at the intersection of law, public policy, and technology. So for the past 20-some years, I've worked at Intel Corporation, where I oversee a variety of things, but primarily right now, that's all of our artificial intelligence public policy and our privacy and cybersecurity efforts.
Okay, awesome. Well, just to start off, I just want to say like part of the reason that I first became interested in this topic and the economy was that, you know, I was a college student, very interested in, of course, finding a job after graduation. So I started looking into this stuff because I didn't want to like study, go into the field and like literally have that automated within 5 years post-grad. So kind of just to start off, if we could just have kind of a discussion of, as we stand today, what is AI capable of, and then maybe discuss what factors make certain jobs or occupations more ripe for automation or more likely for automation, and are any jobs, you know, completely safe from automation, thinking long term. Yeah, if we could just start off with Vince. Thoughts?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just speak like this, maybe that's easier. So what is easy and what is hard in AI has kind of changed our perceptions on what intelligence really is, right? So it used to be that people thought that maybe playing a game like chess is kind of the pinnacle of human intelligence. And then from earlier AI research, we found out that actually that's relatively easier because it's fairly easy to encode what the rules of chess are and how to think about searching through a chess game tree. And so first the lesson was, well, actually kind of the more ambiguous tasks that we deal with, right? The real world is very messy. Some things like, you know, recognizing your grandmother in a crowd. That's very easy to us, and we don't think of that as intelligence, but that is actually much more difficult to get AI systems to do. So that used to be kind of the key example of something that AI couldn't do. That's kind of changed now because image recognition has gotten very good. Still, though, we're very much in the age of narrow AI. That AI is very good at tasks that are kind of very clearly specified, right? So if you have any kind of task that is repetitive, not necessarily that you're doing the exact same thing over and over again, but the same type of thing over and over again, right? So for example, classifying images. You're not going to see the same image again, but you see the same type of image over and over again. And if you have some kind of clear objective that you're trying to measure as well, right? And maybe a lot of data, maybe a lot of labeled data, right? So in machine learning, where we try to extract patterns from data, that is where we're making a lot of progress, right? So particularly if you have a lot of labeled images, let's say, it could be pictures of people's faces, could also be images in radiology. Doesn't have to be images, could also be something like speech, right? But if you have a fair number of those that are labeled, and maybe you have additional data of the same form, so they're labeled with what you would like the algorithm to do. You would like the algorithm to say that this is a picture of a dog and this is a picture of a cat. If you have that kind of setting, that's where AI techniques are getting really good these days. Where they're still not good is in having kind of a general, broad, flexible understanding of the world. So human beings are still they're very adaptive. We're able to jump into a new environment and learn with very few samples, as we would call it, with very little experience. We're able to figure out how to do a decent job in a new circumstance. And we have kind of a broader understanding of the world as a whole, of our social world, so we can deal with very messy, unpredictable situations. And I think that that's a good thing to keep in mind when we're talking about AI and the economy, that at least today's AI is still very narrow. There's lots of specific tasks that it's going to be very good at, and that's going to influence people's jobs. But many jobs require kind of a broader view of things, and that's hard to get automated into an AI system today.
Cool. No, I think you did an awesome job. So if I was going to say anything, I was going to go on to the next question, which is about which jobs are at risk. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
Are you guys interested in that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I would say my two terrible answers are: one, we have no idea, and two, probably none, which are, I think, really controversial statements. But so let me defend the first position, which is not necessarily what I believe, and then the second one, which I don't know if I believe either. But this is one thing that AI is really bad at, which is holding two mutually contradictory ideas at the same time. So the first one is, in economic theory, we tend to think, I would say what makes economics special is you might think about kind of the broader implications, and we would call it like general equilibrium of what's happening. And sometimes those can be really surprising. So let me take a step back from AI to talk about an older example, which is machinery. And one thing that you may not even think about as machinery is the ATM. Right? So when the ATM first came out, people were like, this is, without a doubt, going to basically remove the job of banker, like the person who was at your bank that you would go interact with. And the opposite happened, very surprisingly. There are now more people with the title banker than there was before the ATM. And it's because something kind of complicated happened. It's that it used to be expensive to run a bank branch. So you had one per city, right? Now you have so many ATMs, it got super cheap to have a bank branch, so now you have one on every block. And now you have fewer bankers per bank branch, but you have so many more bank branches that there's actually, so I don't know how common this is, but even in situations where there is a clear substitution effect of the technology for the job, the other things changing in the system might actually make it so much more pervasive. The standard example that people give right now for things that AI is going to decimate, someone earlier said they were a doctor, is like, are we going to completely get rid of radiologists? And it's like, well, naively, maybe, but maybe less naively, what if that just means that it's so cheap to do these tests that we do many more of them? Now, maybe that's bad because then people are being radiated. So the suggestion is that technology can be, this type of technology can be complementary to humans in the sense that it makes you more productive and more useful, and therefore we need more of you. It can be a substitute in the sense that it works instead of you. And whether it's complementary or substitutable, it can either increase the number of people we need to do this or decrease it. So that's a very complicated answer. Now, the other position, which is how many jobs will be replaced, I think the right way to think about it is what tasks will be replaced, And there are a lot of jobs that have tasks. So like one thing that professors used to do is that you would like type your grades in at the end of the term. Like we don't do that anymore. It's not because of AI, you just like upload a spreadsheet, right? But that doesn't mean we don't need professors anymore. If anything, it means professors are spending more time on hopefully the stuff that they're better and more useful at, and so maybe they're getting more productive. If you have a job that is primarily tasks that are being replaced, maybe that job will start to morph into something else, and other people will take on those tasks. So that's the broad question when you hear political arguments about like entire swaths of things being decimated. I would not be that concerned, but if I was choosing what skills to develop, I would say anything about thinking, right? And this is very controversial. In the business school, I'm in the business school, all of the incoming students are like, you should teach us more data science. And part of me is like, yeah, that's great, because that's the thing that's going to give you the highest wage increase right when you come out. But on the other hand, like interpreting a regression is one of the first things that AI will take away from you. So maybe what you should spend your time on is leadership, which is harder to delegate to someone else. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. Critical thinking.
So let me add a little bit to that. I don't think it's to disagree in any
Okay.
way, shape, or form, actually.
You can,
Although
though.
maybe I should, or maybe you will interpret it that way. We can debate it. So one of the things we've been looking at Intel is how to advise governments around the world on what their national AI strategies should be. And the employment issue comes up in every single conversation that we have with the government. So before we wanted to really get into doing a lot of that, we did a survey of all of the research out there, particularly because at the time we had a CEO, he's no longer CEO, this was not the reason, but who would go out and say, AI is going to create more jobs than AI is going to get rid of. And when I would talk to Brian about that and ask what data do you have to support that, he just says, well, I believe it to be true. And that's great. And it turns out that that's basically what anybody who's predicting this is actually doing, that there doesn't seem to be good enough data to make a prediction on whether we are going to follow the path of what's always happened before, where technology and automation has actually created more jobs than it has decreased, or are we going to end up with fewer jobs? What we did find in surveying all of the research and talking to people is, while it's difficult to determine whether there are going to be more jobs or less jobs, one thing is clear is that there is going to be job displacement. There's going to be disruption. And there's going to be disruption that will affect certain tasks, certain jobs, and also areas of the country, likely, and that will have political effects, and not just areas of this country, but areas of all countries, and people need to think through that, particularly government officials. Made me think about what happened to folks who graduated from law school when I came out, and this gets to your question of sort of what do you want to aim at, I think, if you're graduating from college in the next couple of years. When we graduated from law school, it was a great time to be coming out of law school if you were interested in having a job and making a lot of money. That sounds like something you probably are all interested in, but I will tell you the way that most of my classmates went and did that was they went and worked for large law firms and they did discovery or due diligence. This meant you went into a room with 100 boxes of documents and you read through them looking for keywords that the partners had asked you to go find to see if there was going to be an issue. Likely some of the most soul-sucking work that's ever occurred in the legal profession. So I had several of my classmates who went and did this work. I did some of this work right out of law school, enough to know I didn't want to do it anymore. And a few of my classmates who did this had the idea saying, I think technology could do this better than I'm doing it right now. And two of my classmates actually started a company for electronic discovery. And they made more money than any of the rest of my classmates doing this and had actually, I think, a lot more fun. So I think one of the things, the way I see AI, and Vince, I don't know if you would agree with this or disagree, I think where we're at with AI right now is what I call the era of AI implementation. We're taking technologies largely and methods of AI and looking at individual sectors of the economy and individual tasks to see how do we implement AI in this area. Wow, if I was coming out of college now and I had some skills in this area, I'd be taking a look and saying, how can I use AI to improve tasks that are there and to extract value out of that? I think there's huge potential. Now, is that something that everybody in the economy can do? No, I think not everybody in the economy has the right skill set to do that. Do I think students graduating from Duke have those skills? I hope they do.
Did you want to?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think if you're able to think flexibly and have kind of a big picture like that, which hopefully our students do, that is really going to help you a lot. I wouldn't say we're only in the age of AI implementation. I think there is a lot of progress still being made, but certainly there's a lot of opportunity in implementing some of these ideas, right?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and very often that requires more than just knowing how the AI works, right? I mean, I'm trying to teach people how the AI works, but you need more than that to actually figure out how to fit that into a process, right? And how to be entrepreneurial about that, how to change some system, some process that's already happening for the better by using AI, but also knowing how that system works.
I think that's a really important point, and you saying the age of implementation made me think of a couple of things. And so this is going to be advocacy for any classes you can take on the history of science and technology. But Bob Solow, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, at one point made this observation that we can see computers everywhere but in the productivity numbers. Because there was this period where we had computers and everyone was like, obviously this is changing the world, but productivity numbers aren't changing. And people are saying this about AI right now, which is like, if you talk to any of us, AI is going to change the world, and national productivity is not doing super well. And some people have argued that that's because we're still figuring out not how to use AI in terms of the coding, but like where to put it in our lives and how do we organize around it. And it like, I'm dating myself here. I was gonna say like, maybe you guys remember when your like grandparents first got email and they would send you an email and then they would call you to see if you got it, right? Like there's a bunch of social practices that are built around technology that you have to use that you have to build to actually make it useful. And if any of you have had the experience of working with AI, it's not like I flip this switch and it classifies the images for me. Like generally you start up one of these routines and it'll say, what bandwidth do you want for the estimator? What do you want as like, how many iterations do you want to do for the curve ascension algorithm before it stops? Do you want to use BPS or do you want to use BHHP as like the curve ascension algorithm? And so you don't have to know what any of those things are, but what I'm saying is that for us to use AI, a lot of the things that are going to come into place are going to be figuring out what we do it for, rules of thumb about how to do this stuff. Like when you talk to folks at OpenAI, they're like, our major innovation today was that we figured out that a seed of 2.3 works really well. We have no idea why, but when we do that, it predicts out of samples like really, really well. So understanding how these things work enough that you can use them is really important. You're not being displaced, you're augmenting this thing. Is that fair, do you think?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
That being said, just bouncing off that kind of statement of, yeah, you can use AI to kind of figure out how to like optimize, best use AI. Humans can work with AI and figure out how to best use it. What's preventing kind of AI itself from doing that? Like, this seed number is best. What's preventing an AI or a machine learning algorithm from going, okay, through all these trials, this seed number worked like not as good, let's use 0.3. What's stopping that?
And that I think is more doable. Actually, we just had a talk about something very closely related in computer science this morning. That if you're thinking within the confines of the algorithm, and the algorithm has some parameters or some discrete choices to make, yeah, you might be able to automate that, or at least kind of learn in which situations which one works better. I think the harder questions are integrating this with our human society, right? And how to even set up the problem in such a way that it's amenable to these techniques and is going to work in whatever process you're putting it into.
Yeah. Let me give you an example of an optimization problem. You're a first-year undergraduate, and you need to choose what classes to take to get you the best job, to get you the best outcomes in life. optimization problems are really well suited for AI. Why don't we just have AI choose your classes? And part of it's because you have to define the rules of success, right? Are we optimizing for salary? Are we optimizing for like your impact, for your happiness? And until you can agree on the objective function, you can't optimize things.
So it's just like, what you're saying is that AI, no matter like what algorithm you put in, can't really tell you like if you're gonna be or can't really predict like the human side of things, like if people are really satisfied by this class, and et cetera. Is that basically the point at hand?
That's part of the point. I think part of the point is that all AI is gonna do is what you told it to do, and you have to decide what you want it to do.
Yeah, and I would say, I think the point at which any hypothetical of, well, couldn't you just ask AI to do that, where that ends is where humans don't want the AI to do that, where humans demand humanness. And that could be a variety of things, like, no, you can tell me that it spots tumors better in the radiology films, but I feel more comfortable that a doctor has looked at that. Or, yes, I know an AI teacher for my kids. Maybe you can tell me results in better results for my child, but I want to have a human involved in that. If we think that we will get to the point where we never think that there's benefit to have having humans dealing with humans, then maybe we get to that point. I think up until that point, there's a variety of tests where we're going to having humans in the loop somewhere is going to be important. Then you layer on top of that, then how do you cause that to be happen? And the lunchtime speaker, I think, was talking about this a little bit, and I come to a different conclusion than Professor Rushkoff came to, which is his conclusion was we just need to teach people that to want to engage with each other more. I think that is necessary, but likely not sufficient. I think this is where the concept of regulation and legislation has always played, where we have said things like, are we comfortable, this may be a sore spot right now and too controversial to with automated flying where the pilot can't take over completely. No, we have not been comfortable with that. And so we then, and Singapore's pursued this model of AI regulation, of this concept of there's an overall loop and humans will play a variety of different roles, and that the legislation will choose, or the regulation will choose, is it just that the human has to sign off on it? Is it the human's an auditor? Is it the human who then makes a decision later or just runs a risk control process? There's actually a variety of controls there.
But a flip side to that is that oftentimes when you have an algorithm spitting something out, people tend to take it as truth, right? This is what the algorithm came up with, so it must be right. And that's often because they don't really understand how the algorithm works and what kind of biases it could still have. So all the more, I think it is important to have some idea of where humans should be in this process and where we can trust the AI and where not.
I think what Vince is saying is super important, and it's true of technology generally and not just AI. And so you'll see this in research. I was talking to an unnamed scholar at a recent conference, and said scholar said, I think surveys are bullshit because too much can go wrong, so I only use data from the census. And I was like, sister, you are going to be really disappointed when you find out. But there's this idea that there's this like truthiness that comes from certain things. And so one thing that humans can add really is an interpretation of this. And a perfect example is now that we're doing genetic testing. So this is not AI, but suppose that you get a result that says that your likelihood of getting this condition is 200% higher than the base rate. But the base rate is 1 in 40 trillion, right? Like, there's no agnostic UI that's going to present just the facts. Those facts, you're going to interpret them somehow. You're going to see that 200% and freak out, or you're going to see that, oh, I went from nothing to nothing. And so having humans who understand critical thinking and statistics and can explain that to a person and whether they should change their behavior or whether or not to freak out is going to be central, I think, to using AI in our lives.
So you guys mentioned like this idea of like keeping people in the loop having people who can really understand AI and work with AI. Do you guys feel like the amount of, if there might be an issue with like the amount of people we need to keep in a loop is kind of less than the amount of people we needed to do the job before? Is there going, I know David mentioned this earlier where we don't know from data whether there'll be like more jobs made from AI or less jobs made in AI. I was just curious, like Victor and Vince, what were your thoughts on kind of AI and its impact on like raw numbers in the workforce and employment, and if there isn't going to be an issue with that, with still less jobs being available, even though people are still going to be kept in the loop regarding these AI-assisted tasks.
Yeah, I don't think everybody is going to become an AI whisperer and trying to interpret what AI is. Right? There'll be some jobs like that, and in many professions that will be helpful. But there is this concern that if we manage to automate tasks, because I think that's exactly right, that if we're not going to automate entire professions for the most part, but tasks in the profession we can certainly automate, and that might reduce the number of people that you need to do that job, right? And some of that again is not AI, right? If you go to a restaurant these days and you can order on a tablet instead of ordering to a person, well, it's sometimes quite convenient, but that probably means they need fewer people behind the desk, right? They still need some people, but fewer, right? And so I think that's getting at your question, that even though certain professions, they might still exist afterwards, but they might require a lot fewer people if we have things organized the way we do now. How is that going to change? Are people, as a result, going to go into different professions? Probably. Is that going to happen very quickly? And do we need some kind of process for dealing with that? I would say so. I think there are plenty of things for human beings still to do in the world that if we can just guide them to do those, right? I mean, one way to deal with these kinds of things is government spending, right? So if we spend a lot of money on some public work project or more people in education, right? Like more kindergarten teachers, right? As long as we can get people to the right profession, right? No AI system today is going to take over the job of kindergarten teacher, and we could probably use a lot more of them. So the question, I think, is more how to get from A to B and to manage that transition. And it's not that that's easy either, right? I mean, we can't necessarily take a 50-year-old trucker who has been replaced and then make that person a kindergarten teacher with no additional training, right? So that I think is the transition is going to be difficult.
That's super important. I 100% agree with Vince. A bunch of people are trying to predict whether we're going to have more or fewer jobs. I don't know that there's any reasonable way to do that. I mean, but one of the things that Vince talked about is the substitution from one job to another. So I'll give you the example that he gave, which is, suppose that restaurants don't have cashiers anymore because everything you do is on the touch screen. And let's suppose that that lowers their costs enough that they can lower their prices, and now going out to eat is cheaper. And now you can go out to eat more nights per week. So now maybe we need more cooks, right? This is the kind of substitution that might be happening. Now this might not be ideal because it means that now all of the people who used to be like $100,000 a year lawyers doing discovery now have the opportunity to go into a $25,000 a year home health care aide position. And that has the problem of both the major change in income, which is, for the trucker example, the big one. For that level of education, your next best option pays much less. The other thing is kind of the society of science issue of the dignity of these different jobs. If you got displaced from a job that like your parents clapped you on the back for getting, and your nephews are like, one day I want to be like you, and you have to switch into a job that you don't find as non-pecuniarily rewarding, one that doesn't excite you, that you don't want to brag about at coffee shops or cocktail parties. That's another societal thing that we have to think about. So it's the transition and the wage thing, but also how does it feel to be displaced?
And I think that's a critical issue, and I think it's maybe one way to explore the issue is instead of predicting what is going to happen, to say, well, what if we were to enter into, and let's assume there's a possibility that we could enter into a situation with a significant amount of the workforce displaced, having difficulty finding employment or finding some semi-equal level of employment. So they might be employed but underemployed. What kind of societal structures do we need to create around that to allow society to still function? Since I think most data will show that high levels of unemployment, particularly with males between the ages of 20 and 35, is not very good for a society. So I actually think that's one of the critical things that we should be talking about with artificial intelligence and government policy is what kind of government programs are needed there. Now, what's also interesting, I don't know if anybody here is a fan of the show that was on television, Dirty Jobs, but the people who ran that show actually commissioned a bunch of research into enjoyment around employment. It's fascinating research because what they found is the people who really like what they do, the people who are happiest with work. And first of all, they determined people are happier if they're working, which was an interesting, was not that surprising to me, but it's a base level conclusion. They also said the people who are happiest doing work are people who work with their hands. People who have something that they can actually show. So I don't discount the value of being able to be patted on your back for getting a job or being able to impress people at the coffee shop, but the people who are happiest day to day. And so that may be something that we seize upon as a society and say, what would it be like not to have government national programs where we have people doing work that we think has a greater likelihood of making them happy? What would be the value from that? Would it financially pay off for society for us to fund that in some way or set up some systems with incentives?
That would be huge. And so, I mean, honestly, I think that like the media has a real field day with like making fun of millennials. But this movement, like the maker movement, I think, and a lot of things related to it are backlashes against jobs that didn't feel, that maybe were prestigious but didn't feel like you were contributing. And what David said reminded me of something that he said before that I wanted to highlight because I think it's fantastic, is place-based policies, which we haven't really talked about yet. How many of you guys have ever lived in a small town? Oh, wow, fantastic. I mean, that's fantastic for the point I'm about to make. There's no value judgment. But if the substitution has the following character, we no longer need people in the company factory in this town, and therefore we're creating new jobs in Manhattan, that might be like net job creation, but it might be bad for that community. And bad for that community is bad. I don't know where I was going with that. So the idea of talking about net levels of jobs is probably not as helpful as we would like it to be, especially in a country that's so diffuse with superstar cities that are, absorbing most of the job growth.
And I just would add to that what we are hearing time and time again as I travel around the world talking about this is that the United States is much less unique in that respect than people here in the United States think. Go to India, this is a huge issue in India. Go to China, they have the same concerns. Germany has put programs around this in place. This is a global phenomenon.
So I think there's something different in the US then. So I grew up in Holland, Amsterdam, it's a very small country. In the US, I think you have a little bit, and some other countries as well, but you have a little bit of the specialization effect as well, right? New York is for finance, Bay Area is for tech. I think you have a little bit less of that in Europe because it's harder to get that to happen because of all the different languages and maybe different passports also increasingly, right? But certainly the language barrier. And
India
so
may be even more in specialization than the United
I agree.
States.
Right.
And so it does
China
vary.
too, right.
Yeah.
So it does vary. And whether that's a good or not a good thing, but yeah, it does tend to probably tear apart communities to some extent, right? To have everybody who's interested in this goes here, everybody who's interested in that goes there.
I agree.
Kind of moving on to the next question about like the economy as a whole, like what do you guys think, will AI and the people that control it create a less equitable economy, kind of continue the trend of the rich get richer, but now the rich control all the AI resources and they have the power to create value while the rest of us without control of the AI resources only have the power to kind of work for them or something like that. So what are your thoughts on kind of how AI and its increasing importance in the workforce will affect kind of the economic structure and like all these economic tiers kind of as a whole, kind of like big picture, big spectrum?
I don't know, but this is my research agenda right now, so if you're interested in like collaborating with me or being my RA, send me an email. This is the central question.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I would just add to that. I think this wants to get back to some of the themes that we heard at lunch. And so I just want to tell a very brief story. I'll do it really quickly to make a point. That when I graduated from law school, my first job, I was shown an office that had a door and a desk, and it actually had a window, and it overlooked some gardens. It was absolutely beautiful. 5 years later, I took a new position, and I was shown my cubicle in a broad area. 10 years after that, I was told, oh, we're going to move away from defined cubicles. We're going to have travelers' workstations. I'd like to introduce you to my office now. This is my office.
Ooh.
And it's actually been an absolutely wonderful thing, because it's been, the reason why that's my office is because the technology's become incredibly empowering. What I think you heard from Professor Rushkoff is the value of having the one-on-one contact that Professor Rushkoff was saying we've gotten away from because of the technology. I will tell you, because this is my office, I have less one-on-one contact with some of my colleagues. So for example, I was talking to somebody who works for me. I have no idea what city she's in earlier today. And I actually don't care. I have no idea how much each week the people who work for me actually work. I just see their output. And what this has allowed me to do is have more proximity with my family. And I value that proximity. It's not that I don't value proximity with my work colleagues, but I actually value the proximity with my family more. And that's been incredibly empowering. On your overall question, I think this is it depends whether we're successful in democratizing the AI tools. So we have the potential to do that. We have the potential to take the AI tools, put them in the cloud, and allow people, like Professor Rushkoff said, start a small business where you could do things that you've never been able to do before. Will the value be derived there, and so that the individuals are getting the economic value from that, or will the value be derived back at the cloud, the owner of the solution that's allowing you to do that? I actually think government policy is going to play a large role there, and I think it's one of the central issues. So I'm really interested to see where your research goes.
I think that's, and are some of these things going to evolve to monopolies? Are some companies going to be the only ones that have control of the AI, whatever that means? Well, I think AI research these days still is very open, right? I think just about any technique that's out there, you can find a scientific paper on. So it's not like there's a whole lot of proprietary, hidden away AI techniques that only some companies have access to. Now, on the other hand, many of those techniques need data that not everybody has. And it needs people with expertise to actually understand that scientific paper and make something out of it, right? So it's not totally clear what's going to happen there. Also depends on the particular kind of application, right? Maybe some things are more naturally a monopoly, right? Like a social network, maybe, right? And to some extent, we've seen monopolies before, and we know in principle some things about how we can, how we best interact with them in an economy. So I agree. Much of it is just about policy, and that's going to affect what happens here. I don't think that AI is inherently such that it's necessarily going to drive all the wealth to a few people. I think that just depends on what you do with it.
Now, while we're on the topic of like government policy and stuff, what steps do you guys think needs to be taken in terms of kind of educating the general public about the possibilities of how AI can disrupt the economy and the workforce? Because like you said, the academic, I guess, consensus right now is that people don't really know exactly what's going to happen, but kind of what steps would be good to take in terms of like initiatives in order to communicate to the general public to be more vigilant and think more critically about these issues and maybe help prepare them for what's to come. in terms of AI and its potential for disruption?
I think it would be very reasonable to teach kind of a very high-level course on AI, even in high school. It doesn't have to be technical. It doesn't even need you to know about programming, right? But just some introduction into the kinds of things that it can do and the kinds of things that it cannot do, because often we don't hear about the kinds of things that it cannot do, right? A very nice example of this is what's known as a Winograd schema. How many people have heard about this before? So a Winograd schema is, it's a pair of sentences where pronoun is ambiguous, but it's very easy for us to figure out what's going on. So a standard example is, the ball crashed through the table because it was made of styrofoam. Right? What does it refer to in that sentence? Well, it refers to the table, obviously, right? But actually, syntactically, it's completely ambiguous. Right? Because if I change the sentence and I say, well, the ball crashed through the table because it was made of steel, say, oh, it refers to the ball, right? And nothing in the syntax really told you which of the two it was, right? It's just kind of your common sense. Well, steel things crash through stuff, right? And we do that so naturally, we don't even realize we're doing it. AI systems today cannot do these things well at all, right? They get like about half of them right. If you create new ones. So I think it's also important for people to understand what limitations we still have and what things it can do well, right? So that they can take advantage of where it does well, but also not freak out about things that, at least for now, are not automatable. Right?
Do you think that, at least you mentioned for now that it's not automatable, but could AI possibly, like when it reads that sentence, the ball crashed through the table because it's made out of, for example, could it basically go, oh, I see steel, I'm going to look at the density of steel, and then I'm going to look at a ball and what people can normally expect from a ball, and then kind of piece together which noun the ambiguous it was referring to. Do you feel like, because I feel like part of the discussion was that a lot of it's, oh, AI can't do it now, but is it entirely possible that it will be able to handle this schema or this issue like later? That's not out of the picture.
I can imagine some improvement on it, but I think for now it's still going to struggle with those kind of scenarios unless we have some really new development, which, of course, some people want to go all the way to artificial general intelligence that is broadly as intelligent as we are. Well, that's going to change the world in ways that I don't think anybody can really foresee but that seems, we don't seem to have a path to get there at this point.
Let me go back to a question that you asked before. So you said, why is it important to educate the public? Or how do you want to educate the public? And I would say, well, why do you want to educate the public? Not because I think that you shouldn't, but like, what's your actual goal? And if your goal is we want people to stop training themselves for careers that are going to be displaced, as a student, I would like you to go through the following exercise. Say, I'm thinking of majoring in the following thing, but if AI is able to solve the Winograd schema problem in the next 20 years, then that's a bad idea. If that's the margin on which you're making decisions, you should probably not do that. And maybe you should optimize less in your life. This is like an incredible level of rationality and planning that you're expecting. Now, the things where it's important to educate people are things like the truthiness that Vincent talked about, which is, so like one problem that AI has right now is that in a lot of settings it has bad racial or gender bias because it's trained on biased data. Now, it might be important for you to know that, not because you should dedicate your life to fixing it, but just so when the AI tells you something, you take it with a grain of salt. I think that's useful.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there's a variety of implications from AI. The truthfulness portion would be one, privacy would be another one, where you should want individuals to know what the consequences are from AI. The fake news phenomenon, much of which has been automated recently, is another one. We should be teaching people how to think critically about information that they're hearing, also where to go look for information that they might want to rely on more. But at the same time, on almost all of these topics, I feel that the the push of how to educate the public is used as an excuse for government not to play government's role of protecting people. This whole idea of, you've recently seen this in the privacy area with the privacy law that's passed in California, where the burden is put almost completely on the individual. You have to find organizations that are processing your data. You have to find out what they're doing, and then you tell them whether or not they should do something. Instead of having a law to say, it's actually illegal to use people's personal data to harm them. That's a strange place for government to get to. When we should be asking the question, education clearly has to play a role, but let's not rely upon it too much in situations where it's really hard for individuals to be able to define how these technologies are going to impact them.
I think that's totally right, and I would say I want to double down on that for young people. And I don't know exactly what I mean by young people, but I will tell you that some of my colleagues will periodically complain about their children or what our students post on Instagram. And they'll be like, don't you realize that at some point AI is going to figure out that this picture of you like getting wasted on the beach is you, and that will be findable by someone who's looking to see if they should give you a job, and that's going to affect your future. And I see this and I'm like, is the problem AI? Or is the problem like something about being able to make choices in the long term? I don't know, but we certainly shouldn't make it any harder. Right, especially like at a certain age, I think as a society we've kind of agreed not to hold you completely accountable for your actions up to a certain limit. I don't know, that's controversial.
All right, as we're nearing the end of our time for the panel, I just wanted to open up this discussion to audience questions. Anybody have any questions for the panelists? Yep. Oh yeah, you over there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I enjoyed the talk, so I have some more questions. One has to do with, again, taking it back to health. There's a concept called social determinants of health, and I think you might be familiar with that, Victor. But it rests on looking at various factors, really 5 of them, such as economic stability, the education level, social and community context, and all these different factors, and they're all have been well demonstrated as being integral to human health. And this is not just in the States, this is really any place in the world. What kinds of changes would you anticipate, either for better or for worse, or who knows, would you anticipate AI potentially having on those types of factors? Because they're important considerations. You talked about the example of shifting or geographic displacement of jobs or people, and that definitely plays a role. I've lived in a small town before, I came to Duke, and that the economy and the job availability and all of that stuff definitely has an impact on health and health literacy, which is another piece to the puzzle. But where do you see things going as far as those factors? How can AI either help or hurt those different things?
I guess one way in which it might help is to develop new tools, new apps that give you feedback about these things. Are you living a healthy lifestyle? Maybe you should be thinking about such and so, maybe, right? And it's not easy to build those things well, right? And you know, AI would be a small part of it. There'd be a lot of other things that you would have to do in order to get that to work well. But in principle, you could use it to give people better feedback on their health, right? You could maybe gamify certain things about taking a certain number of steps or what have you. So I think there is positive potential there as well.
I think the positive potential is kind of obvious. I mean, like the number of people walking around who are like, I know that I should get this thing checked out by a doctor, but I haven't had a chance. And if they could take a picture of it and get it, you know, some guidance on whether they should, I think that's obvious. The downsides, I mean, I don't know that we could predict all of them, but things related to kind of the truthiness of the advice that you get, I don't know that any of us can give a reasonable answer. It's a huge question.
It's a great question. I think the thing I'd want to think more about is, are there, if we could get access to enough data and enough of the right data to do the training of the algorithms, could AI propel personalized medicine forward in a way that we're not doing right now. I think that would be really interesting.
I think another aspect of it is that, well, right now you always get the advice that you shouldn't just read something on the web and make your own decision. You should go see your doctor. You should go see your doctor. In reality, presumably that doesn't really happen, right? Sometimes people will go see their doctor, but other times they just see what they do read something online. And so I think we need to get to some better middle ground there, that it can't just always be the advice to go see your doctor, right? Either that or we have to make that more accessible. But how do we then get people to consume this content responsibly, whether AI has a role in that or not, but yeah, I think that's important.
Oh, yes.
So what is the current status of the universal income debate? I don't think that's a great idea, but anyway, I just wonder where is the current status on that issue, and whether it is possible, or is there any discussions on creating more jobs, like you said, more kindergarten teachers, more elderly care jobs, more human-to-human provide those things that AI cannot do. Because it just cannot be government only, because there's a lot of political pushbacks. So, what is it, public-private partnership, are people talking about those things currently, thinking in the future?
Do you guys have expertise on?
I will say a lot of people are talking about public-private partnerships in this area. Yeah, I think the most innovative one, and to me the most interesting, is what India is doing in that regard. They're launching, if I get this right, Indian Centers for Transformative AI, which are public-private partnerships looking at how to use AI to transform Indian society, and they're breaking up by individual industry sectors. So they're launching one on AI implementations in mobility and agriculture that Intel's participating in. And I think that's a really interesting approach to at least the public-private partnership model.
So I can speak to the UBI. I would say the status of it is that it's a debate. And the debate is basically coming out of the Silicon Valley. I think the general perception is that it's not a great idea, especially amongst economists, for a bunch of different reasons. So one is that our tax system right now is very complicated, which might be bad, but it has the beneficial effect of disproportionately giving more to people who need more. And a universal basic income, the way it's usually described, of giving the same amount to everybody, is going to have a very high cost, because you have to cover the cost of giving the money to the people who don't need it, and it doesn't have much of an effect, because people who have enough money who get a windfall tend to save it, so it doesn't prop up the economy. There's a smaller community who's talking about something called a conditional basic income, which in Europe has this form of a guaranteed basic income, which is, I don't give money to everyone in the Alaska model, but I make up the difference between your wage and a certain wage, which means that it doesn't give anything to anyone above a certain amount. There's some proponents of that idea. There's a lot of discussion. On the creating jobs thing, the Green New Deal, I think, has been spun in this frame quite a lot. And almost every municipality is giving some kind of incentive to create jobs locally. There's huge debates about whether that works or not. And it's something that I would be happy to point you to resources on or talk about. That's where the big policies are now.
I think some of the people who advocate universal basic income, if you ask them a little bit more, you'll find that actually what they mean isn't necessarily universal basic income in its purest form, right? That they use it almost more like a metaphor, that, well, really what they're talking about are things like very good unemployment insurance, making it very easy, right? Well, why shouldn't anybody who wants to be able to get a job in nursing, maybe, right? Well, maybe there are some reasons, but those kinds of ideas, right? That, and I think more economists probably could get on board with those kind of suggestions than the pure form of universal basic income.
Oh, yes, sir.
Earlier you were talking.
Yeah, we'll make this the last question.
Okay. Earlier you had spoken about the difference between specialized AI and general AI to be more like human perception. Like what we perceive as understanding, is there a qualitative difference in your mind between what we perceive as understanding and this general AI?
What a general AI would be perceiving as understanding, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's-
Or how we perceive understanding and what a computer can do as a general intelligence.
Yeah, it's an interesting
Generally, yeah.
question, right? Because we obviously at this point we don't have those systems yet, and there's a lot of debate about what it is exactly that is missing at this point, right? There's a number of keywords that keep coming up as being the kinds of things that are missing, right? And some are like having a broad understanding of the world, some are having common sense reasoning, having some kind of creativity, flexibility, and it's not clear that all those things are really all that different, right? Because maybe our common sense reasoning is just reflecting that we do have that broad, flexible understanding of the world, which leads to our common sense reasoning, because we have that broad understanding, we can look at something from multiple angles, and even though like it looks like a reasonable idea from one angle, the other angle immediately reveals that it's not a good idea. Maybe that's all that common sense reasoning is, or maybe not, right? Or is kind of out of the box creativity. Well, AI systems already can be creative, right? AlphaGo came up with Go moves that no human player would ever do. So in that sense, it's creative, but it's kind of inside the box creative. That AlphaGo doesn't propose to change the rules of the game of Go, right? Because the game would be more fun that way. No, that's completely outside of the scope of the thing that it can do right now. So that kind of out of the box creativity seems to be missing. But then again, you know, if the system just had a broad enough understanding of the world, maybe it's just the same kind of creativity again, right? Some kind of move in this bigger space of understanding the world would lead you to a new version of Go or something like that. So I think in some sense we don't really know what is missing. We have some idea of the kinds of things that we don't know how to do, and they all seem to be somewhat related, which might be concerning. That you know, who knows? Maybe we're only one kind of big insight away. Probably not, but yeah. So we don't really know what we don't know.
It's a big question. I mean, but there was something interesting in the way that you framed it, which was something to suggest like, will computers ever achieve our level of understanding? And I guess the pedant in me would say, to what extent do we understand? And you see this with like any number of times where we know something for a fact and we go to a country where it's not true, or you know, times like there was a time when the financial and kind of Wall Street communities knew that we had completely eliminated volatility from the markets, and they knew that for a fact. And that meant they understood the world up until 2007.
All right, cool.
On that pessimistic note.
Good times.
Before we conclude, let me just congratulate the Wang Fellows on an extraordinary day. As has been apparent, this was a student-conceived, student-run, student-administered program, particularly Preeti and Kat, who's not here, Eugene and Daniel and Reagan for their very hands-on participation. This couldn't have happened without them and the support of the other Wang Fellows. And from Science and Society, Julia